The webinar today is scheduled for 45 minutes plus 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. And we want this webinar to be interactive, so we encourage your participation. To participate, please enter your questions using the Q&A tab located at the top of your Zoom console. And if we're unable to answer your questions during today's webinar, we'll follow up by email. And lastly, I want to remind everyone that a recording of this live webcast and a copy of the PowerPoint slides will be emailed to all the participants. So thank you for joining us today. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're located. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, File Upload, a Critical Gap in Web App Security. So as organizations move to the cloud, thousands, millions, or tens of thousands of documents are now being shared among collaborators on a daily and weekly basis, even within a single organization. And these files are being uploaded to either a web portal, customer portal, or support portal. And at the same time, IT is investing an enormous amount of effort and time into building high availability and fault-tolerant systems and securing them. However, file upload remains a major attack vector, and it's far too often not covered by traditional web app defenses. And in today's webinar, we'll cover the types of risks to web applications and how to apply a zero trust model to both users and the files they upload and the devices from which these uploaded files originate. The discussion will focus on high performance deterministic methods, which neutralize the threats, whether known and unknown, in uploaded files. And then we'll introduce how OPSWAT can help prevent threats and help you maintain compliance. Now let's get started. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our co-presenters, Randy Abrams and George Pachich. So welcome, gentlemen. I'll now hand the presentation over to Randy to get us kicked off.
That. However, sometimes people overlook where the files are going and what constitutes upload. And what we're seeing is even when we know there's a repository, like sending a resume to human resources, there isn't enough protection. And that's why the bad guys love to use tactics like that. They work, they're really easy. So let's carry on here. In this presentation, we're going to identify some of these risky file repositories. Sometimes people don't equate share with upload. So things like Slack, Confluence, things like that. These are some of your risky file repositories. We're also going to talk about vulnerabilities in apps because the file-borne threats on these web apps often use the vulnerabilities. And then we're going to close up with best practices and some questions and answers. I'm delighted to be presenting with George. George is very knowledgeable, the Director of Product Management, and an all-around great guy to work with. You can learn a lot from him. He's an expert. So OPSWAT's been around 2002, and that's how long I've been familiar with the company. I've been working for OPSWAT close to a year now. We have 9 offices throughout the world. In addition to the 1,500 customers, we're protecting over 100 million endpoints. We've got 2,000 certified professionals and an unsurpassed support team. We've got 24/7 support. So where do your files live? And I mentioned Slack and I mentioned Confluence as kinds of examples, and those can be on-site or in the cloud, typically in the cloud for Slack. But do you understand where in the cloud the protections that you need on-site additionally? We're going to take a look at some of those. George, how'd you like to tell us what we're looking at here?
Thanks, Randy. I think one of the most important part is that file upload is a functionality exposing a lot of web applications. These web applications are either on-site, as Ren explained in the previous slide, and usually the on-site ones on your premises are the ones that have been kind of like homegrown. Think about like a lot of like finance applications and so on, or more and more was a huge adoption actually for CMS-based applications, right? WordPress is backing up over 30% of the websites worldwide, but you have like Drupal, you have Magento, you have like a lot of CMS solutions, right? And all of those, regardless if it's like homegrown, custom build application or it's based on CMS, all of them are facing, let's say, exposing a file upload functionality, or they're exposing different vulnerabilities, either from file upload, any kind of injection attacks, and so on, right? And those are the type of attacks that are happening, and most of, let's say, like web application firewalls are mostly focusing on like OWASP top 10 type of attacks, but they're not focusing on like file upload attacks and so on. And this is like one of the biggest topics whenever you're taking those web applications being on premise or trying to move them to the cloud. Some of them are even, let's say, monolithic applications. It's hard for you to like break them apart and actually build something scalable in the cloud. And whenever you're trying to do that, again, new issues appear, new things are being oversighted, and those issues are the ones that are going to drive a lot of the data breaches you're seeing nowadays. Even if you're moving to the cloud, there's also kind of discussion always like, are we going to go and leverage an infrastructure as a service? We're going to go and leverage directly a SaaS product, solution like a Salesforce, Zendesk, and so on, right? And these are type of discussion are happening quite often. Like, should I move my existing application? I'm building something brand new, and I'm going to leverage the AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and so on stacks. They're going to offer me highly available systems I can actually deploy and create like that microservices approach and so on, but I still have to maintain my application, right? Or I'm going to go with a out-of-the-box solution that's offered, let's say, for a support portal. Again, you have like Salesforce and Zendesk. You can have your customers up and running in almost like no time. They can open tickets, they can attach files to those tickets, but you always need to ask yourself, like, okay, are those files being secure? Well, from availability perspective, they are. From, I know, they're encrypted at rest, you don't have any concerns there, but what do you know about those files? Are you sure that those files are not malicious? That's not always the vendor's responsibility to actually go and scan those files, sanitize those files, and so on. And as Randy mentioned before, like all these applications you see here, all of them are productivity tools that expose a file upload functionality, but most of them don't guarantee that the files are being uploaded to their platform are not malicious. And that's why the threat actors are using this kind of platforms to actually go and push as much as possible and share those files, let's say, with your end users through those platforms, because they know you're going to trust those applications, even though the files uploaded to them might actually be malicious. And again, discussion is moving on forward, like, why are you giving up? What exactly you're giving up when you're moving to the cloud, right? What exactly, like giving up control, but what exactly you're giving up? And that's the kind of topic whenever you're shifting right the responsibility. As you see here, not even discussing the on-premise. IaaS right now is kind of like moving more towards the serverless and SaaS approach, right? You want your teams to be a lot more focused actually on developing the application, developing the functionalities, or maintaining a service or making a service available to your end users without actually being responsible for like hardware, maintaining hardware, building data centers, and so on, right? And it's not just a matter of like cost for those building a brand new data center. It's also like the manpower. You need a lot of resources, very hard to get these days, right? So it's easier for you to go and leverage as much as possible platforms that put everything pretty much almost ready to go. You just need to some customizations, and you can actually have your support portal available, but you're gonna need to be able to secure that information that's being shared on that one. Again, access controls are defined for those applications. However, when it comes to like file upload functionality, they're not gonna provide you an out-of-the-box solution to actually scan and sanitize those files. And probably the best example here is, again, the shared responsibility model, right? AWS is doing a great job explaining how that works in their environment. You're pretty much responsible for everything from OS above, anything's infrastructure, it's on them. right? However, when it comes to like SaaS products, in theory, the SaaS vendor is responsible for everything. However, you still have your responsibility to your end users to make sure that the files or like the data you're saving and storing, it's not malicious either. And when it comes to like file upload attacks, right, I like to classify them in 3 different sections, or like 3 different types of attacks. One is the server-side attack, right? I'm gonna try to go after the infrastructure of the solution. There are like a lot of solutions out there. You have like kind of crawlers that are scraping the internet, trying to find WordPress version 1, 2, 3 that has like a particular vulnerability. I'm gonna be able to like exploit that vulnerability, and most probably I'm going to use it for like defacement or things like that, right? And this is something that's quite popular, like, and it's very easy to identify. But more and more nowadays, it's highly popular to go and try to leverage the infrastructure to do crypto mining. Actually, it was highly popular when people were pushing their AWS access keys to GitHub. That was just crawling the GitHub repos, try to get the access keys within minutes. I'm doing thousands of dollars damage to your account. Why? Because it's so easy, because people are negligent, because people don't understand exactly what's the risk they're being exposed, right? Exactly same thing on file upload functionality as well. I'm going to try to use that functionality to go after the infrastructure, end up maybe like remote code execution, or maybe even I'm doing like an SRF attack and I'm trying to get exfiltrate the access keys or any other sensitive data. And this is how like data breaches will happen, right? For you as an application owner, I think this is the highest risk possible for people to actually go after the server-side attack. Because again, being the owner, that's your responsibility. That's what you're gonna care for, right? However, when it comes to the definition of like owner versus consumer, right? Like I'm the service owner, but the consumers are my end users. Maybe someone's gonna leverage my solution to actually go after the end users. In theory, that's not necessarily my responsibility, right? Like large organizations, you have different departments. Each department has its own clear roles and responsibilities defined. So you're responsible to keep the infrastructure in place, nobody to be able to like breach and get access to your infrastructure layer. That's something you're gonna focus on. But what happens if your solution is actually leveraged to go after the end users, right? And that's a huge risk as well, because the moment you're gonna receive a file upload or like a file that's being malicious being uploaded to your solution, and that file is being downloaded and opened by someone in the organization, in the enterprise, that means that they already passed the perimeter, right? They already passed all the security measures and they're already in. From them, that moment on, it's more of like lateral movement. It's going to try to maybe like credential theft. It's going to try to get access to more data, do data exfiltration, and so on. And this is something we've seen quite often, right? And again, the third type of concern is a distribution platform. Once again, your solution might not be exposed to a server-side attack, but might be leveraged as a distribution platform. The moment someone's using a solution to actually store the malicious file and then use it to distribute to different end users, that solution is going to lose brand. It's going to lose pretty much, recognition, and people are going to blame it for that attack, even though it's not necessarily their fault. There were like a lot of attacks recently where people are just uploading files to Dropbox, Google Drive, and so on, and share that one. No organization is going to lock down or like block access to Dropbox, Google Drive, Office 365, all the productivity tools, right? So from that perspective, the moment you receive a Dropbox link, maybe your users are going to trust it, right? Because Dropbox is a reputable, trustable source. But their responsibility is just to distribute the files and make them available. Their responsibility is not necessarily to actually scan the file, make sure it's not malicious, right? So that's, again, one of the big concerns that you might have, that people are going to leverage the solution you put together to be able to like distribute malicious content. And I think this is like a key factor for like anything that's happening in the with the cyber attacks nowadays. Any functionality that's being built out there, being active content in Office documents, in PDFs, and so on, through APIs for file sharing solutions and so on. Any functionality you're building to enrich and like make your end users' life easier and better, those exact functionality are going to be tried to be leveraged in a malicious way as well. If an end user is using the functionality, they will try to exploit that functionality to be able to get that end user. And that's the part you should be highly concerned. When it comes to best practices, by far OWASP is #1 in recommending best practices for web applications, right? They're the ones that are generating the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities from applications that everybody trusts. They're the ones that recommend how to secure your web application. And in this example is the file upload cheat sheet they're providing for testing web applications. And I'll try to briefly discuss some of the topics here and pretty much explaining why this is not necessarily enough. One of the most important part is for you as an application or like an owner of an application to whitelist what are the file types you allow, right? Very important, it's file types, not extensions. OWASP is mentioning extensions. That's so easy to spoof, right? First, the validation should always happen on the server side, not on the client side, because otherwise, I don't know, putting a proxy in the middle and overwriting that one is super easy. Sorry. Or even like, I don't know, renaming the file, that's not a problem, right? Of course, you're not going to rely on content type header, but you need to do the validation for the file type on the server side. Once again, don't do it based on the extension. To actually do it based on the true file type, that requires a lot more work. The more file types you allow in, the more work you have to do on the validation side. It's not just about magic numbers, it's a lot more complex than that. Randy is going to explain a bit later. When it comes to file name, this is very important. It's still happening, and I cannot believe that file path traversal attacks are still happening, right? This is something you need to validate the file names and always store them as like temp files. Store them like hashes or like unique IDs. Don't store them with the original file name. One of the best examples, like that's how S3 works as well. They have a lot of final object IDs and so on that you have to rely on. On the file size limit, more and more applications right now, they're not storing the file on the same disk as the web application, right? They're storing, again, on S3 for AWS, they're storing even like on NAS and so on. So they're not gonna be able to like overload that server and run out of disk space. But it's very important that if you store the files on the same server, that's something you're still might be exposed to, like path traversal, access issues, and so on. So always try to push it for a different service. One of the things that I highlighted here, and I think it's very important, is the recommendation is to scan the file with an antivirus or just detonate it in a sandbox. That's pretty much just ticking a box, right? You're saying, yes, I scanned the file. A lot of organizations will say, yeah, I'm just going to go and use ClaimAV. It's open source, it's free. I pretty much respect what the file upload cheat sheet is saying. I'm scanning the file. But that's not going to get you anywhere close to actually have protection in place, right? And that's the biggest problem. Like, if you only tick a box, it's a matter of like, this will happen in a week, in 2, maybe 6 months, a year, depends on how popular your application is, on what's the interest for them to go after your application, right? If you rely on the sandbox, sandbox is not a solution that's going to offer you prevention. Sandbox is used for dynamic analysis to have more like a detailed, more analysis report than actually providing you a thumbs up, thumbs down approach. For keeping the libraries up to date, the more third parties you're using, the more libraries, open source tools you're using, the more exposed you might be to vulnerabilities in those third party tools, right? So keep that in mind. Like, one of the terrible examples out there is still Equifax, where they actually data breach happened because someone crafted a document that was able to leverage a vulnerability in an open source tool. Randy, would you like to share a couple of things about the restricting the file types and the static versus dynamic analysis?
Sure, I'd love to. Restricting the file types based on the true file types, but not the extension, is a little bit trickier than it might sound. I'll get to that in just a bit. But if you look at things like JavaScript, if the anti-malware products didn't look at .txt the same way they look at JavaScript, then it's a simple way to get a malicious script into an environment, then other programs, malicious programs, can just change the extension. So it actually gets a little bit more complex than looking at file headers and end of file markers, which I'll get to in just a moment. But multi-scanning is something I'm highly passionate about. In 1997, I started Microsoft's multi-scanning system that is used to protect our customers or Microsoft's customers from infected software. It's a really bad thing when Microsoft releases infected software, which they used to do quite a bit, but haven't for a long time. However, with critical infrastructure, oh man, it's not just infecting millions of computers, it's people's lives, as all of you do know. There are a couple things about anti-malware. There's static analysis and dynamic analysis. And static analysis is what most people think of. They think of signatures. And actually, static analysis goes a little bit farther than signatures. In around 2003, I was the guinea pig for a neural network that a major antivirus product was developing. And to touch on that just a bit, people worry about false positives when it comes to using multi-scanning. And I can tell you, going through hundreds of millions of files, except for training a neural network, I had very few problems with false positives. And mind you, I was using the heuristics maxed out. In some cases, I actually had custom heuristics, undocumented switches. So that's just my brief word on false positives. So heuristics are a form of dynamic analysis. People think of sandboxes when they think of dynamic analysis, and that is true. But the anti-malware products also use dynamic analysis. One of the big differences is that the scanners don't have time to do the thoroughness that a sandbox actually does, but the scanner in a very short amount of time has to say yes or no, it's infected. There could be a maybe in there, but predominantly it's yes or no, whereas a sandbox doesn't tell you. It gives you a confidence score. We're 80% sure that it's malicious, or we're 50% sure. So it's important that sandboxing is used in some environments in some manner, inline or offline, but the scanners do provide a bit of that. The one gotcha. When you're using scanners, sometimes you don't know which ones may not have dynamic analysis or the relative quality. And that's why I was using all the scanners I could at Microsoft. I wasn't worried about which ones don't have signatures. I was worried about an inside attack. And by maxing out the heuristics, I pretty much gave anyone that might try one shot at my system. Now, tied in with the static dynamic analysis, restricting file types is sanitization, content disarm and removal. We call it deep CDR because we go through multiple layers of recursions in different file types. But one of the things we're seeing is steganography. And we're seeing it in two manners. One are the more traditional, encrypt a message inside of an image or other type of file. And the other, which has become common, is malware appended to the end of an image file. And that's where it gets a little tricky because you can open up, for example, a PNG. You'll see a valid beginning of file header for a true PNG. You're going to see the end of file marker. And pretty much everything after that tends to be ignored. Picture viewers don't care. However, when you use content disarm and reconstruction, one of the things it does is make sure that when the file is reconstructed, it is compliant with the file type, which means we didn't even know there was malware appended to the image. We weren't looking for it, but the process of sanitization and rebuilding a compliant file just lops the end off of that. There are several techniques to remove steganography. Basically, you don't remove it, you break it. You can change a few bits here and there by doing things like converting images from one format to another. But just that simple thing isn't going to eliminate appended malware. It's when you reconstruct to a functional file that meets the specifications. George, how would you like to talk about our access control? It's something you're pretty passionate about.
Thanks, Randy. I'd like to add one thing though to the sanitization process, right? The reason that bullet point is sanitize the content is not necessarily because we're trying to expand more on deep CTR necessarily, as is, again, it's a content received from the user. It's user input, right? And this is the most important part. The way we are pushing to our developers for any functionality they're building, for any form they're building, to make sure there's no injection, they validate that user input, make sure they're not trying to do anything malicious with that user input. Exactly same thing here, right? You need to sanitize that content. It's not just like input validation and sanitization. It's exactly the same thing for the form as it is for file upload, right? Don't think about that one. File upload, it's on different team. I know it's application team, it's storage team, it's networking. I don't care who's taking care of that one. It's not necessarily on the developer side, right? But it's very important for you to have that one as like a takeaway. File upload is still user input. When it comes to access control, this is something that, again, very important. It's a matter of like what exactly users have access to it, right? One of the topics in our recommendation is to allow file uploads from authenticated users. How do you trust those users? How do you know that particular user, it's not insider thread, even if it's not doing anything malicious? Maybe that user was compromised, its credential was compromised, its system was compromised. So you cannot trust that just because the file upload comes from even the CEO, doesn't mean you should handle it differently than it will come from a consultant or temp front desk person, right? That's the most important part. You need to make sure that whatever you receive, you're gonna handle them uniformly. Don't trust those files. You're gonna be able to like first do everything you can to scan, sanitize, and so on the content, and then to offer particular access controls to put in place for that file to be able to leverage only for the people using it, right? So think about from a SaaS product perspective. If I upload the file, I have the rights, let's say Dropbox, Box, and so on, to share a file with a particular person. Like, well, they'll be the only ones having access to the system. But again, that functionality can actually be exploited maybe. The SRF was actually a very popular topic last year as well, where you can actually craft in 5 minutes a PDF, you push it to some solutions that are crafting or like they're trying to get the data out of the PDF, they're parsing the PDF. Let's say insurance form, anything that's even like resume upload and things like that, right? Try to extract that from the PDF. As long as you're able to like fake a couple of things at PDF, maybe you're gonna get access to run a script and push back the SSD from AWS back to your system. And based on that, you own that system, right? Those are kind of things you should be aware whenever you're looking like file upload. Just because you're saying that, hey, I'm allowing only like PDFs and images, that doesn't mean that you're secure. Even saying I only allow CSV, which is a text file, I'm secure. We can talk a bit more about that one as well. There are things you can do also in a text file like CSV. When it comes to handling sensitive information, this is a way bigger topic nowadays as well. GDPR, it's still a big concern worldwide. More and more adoption is like California Consumer Privacy Act. It's kind of like California's response to GDPR. And these kind of approaches are happening more and more worldwide. We're trying to protect sensitive data. We're trying to protect consumer information, right? But how do we handle those ones? If someone's uploading, maybe doesn't need to, you're not requesting for them to upload their credit card or social security number and so on, but they're uploading that one. How do you handle that one? Just by someone sending you their credit card information through the file upload, you're violating PCI and you're gonna end up with a big fine, right? You need to make sure whenever you're receiving that kind of information, you route it in the right place or you're rejecting it. But if you're allowing it, you actually push it through, I don't know, an encrypted, secure environment. Nobody has access, only the people that were supposed to, or only system that were supposed to, and so on, right? That's the kind of data cyber criminals are gonna go after. That's the information that's very valuable for them, right? So make sure you know what kind of data you receive and you're putting all the processes in place to actually manage and encrypt that data.
So, George, I'd like to add one more thing to this. I mentioned PNGs when I talked about deep CDR, but I didn't mention we actually support dozens of different file types, from Office files, from PDFs, regional files like for Japanese and Korean word processors, scripts. There's all kinds of things that we will support. And when it comes to handling sensitive information, that was a type of module I built right into my multi-scanner at Microsoft. I could add, because of the extensibility of the system, I can add all kinds of modules. And instead of doing separate scans, they're all in line and happen at the same time. And when you look at deep CDR, and it's ripping apart all these different kinds of archives and embedded objects and documents, that's a perfect time to also look for the sensitive information, because if you don't rip that stuff apart before you reconstruct it, you're going to miss that. Okay, back to you, George.
Thanks, Randy. All right. This is like a perfect example of one of our customers as testimonial. Upwork is probably the biggest freelancer marketplace out there, and they had people using their platform to spread malicious files and mostly go after the end users, right? They first looked at our multi-scanning solution, which was cutting a big part of the malicious files, right? We're able to detect a big file chunk of them, but still there were ways they were like try to like repackage, rebuild, and so on that malicious file, and they try to re-upload it and so on. That's when they start looking at our sanitization component as well. With deep CDR, not only that they were able to remove any malicious embedded objects, but they also kind of like seen a huge drop in the malicious file uploads from the attackers, right? So it's a win-win situation where the attackers became, I don't know, discouraged actually to try to go after this platform because they couldn't actually bypass it. And this is like a huge benefit for the technology, right? You have the multi-scanning in place, you're going to detect everything that it's known bad, but if they're trying to like repackage it and try to avoid the signature detection, even like AI detection and so on, you still have deep CDR to sanitize that content. If you want to learn more, we have the case study on our website. Go ahead, we'll have like a joint webinar with them when they explain the entire process and what they've seen, including going through like sandbox solutions for this kind of attacks and so on, and why those were sufficient either. A couple of things about deep CDR, because we keep mentioning the part of like sanitizing the content, right? This is the part where our solution actually takes the complex file, we look at all the embedded objects in that file and remove anything that might be malicious or drive malicious behavior at runtime. That means any active content that is in that file, that's the one we're going to look at, like either sanitize it or remove it. In this example, for instance, if you have a document with images in it, we're going to go and sanitize all those images. If you have a PDF in a Word doc, in an Excel, in another PDF, we're going to go through the entire chain and sanitize everything. But there are objects that cannot necessarily be sanitized, but still might drive malicious behavior. We remove them entirely. All the objects being a good example, ActiveX controls and so on. A lot of people are highly afraid of macros in Word documents because everybody heard about macros, right? Like that was like the biggest topic. Yes, you can execute code in an Office suite, and that code is going to be able, or like it's going to be leveraged to actually get access to a PowerShell or run a malicious script and so on, right? Macro is just like one of the 10, 15 components in an Office document that might drive a malicious behavior. And that's what we're trying to prevent, right? So when it comes to sanitization process, we're going to keep the content, we're going to keep the usability as much as possible, and you're going to have a safe to consume content. You're going to have your animations in PowerPoint, you're going to have your formulas in Excel and so on, but we're going to remove macros and so on. All these things are definitely configurable and so on, but our recommendation, try to be as strict as possible, remove anything that might drive that malicious behavior. And that will be a safe to consume, risk-free content for your end users, right? This, as Randy explained, we have support for over 80 file types, support for even like regional Office suites. In Korea, it's Hancom. In Japan is Ichitaro. So that's the part we're highly focused on right now. And this is the fastest growing technology that we have especially in the file upload use case. Everybody's reaching out to us for the multi-scanner, but they eventually go in a hybrid deployment with CDR and multi-scanning. To explain a bit how Defender works, right? We have all the configurations. What you can define on Defender side is a workflow where you can configure how the file is being analyzed. And we have that multi-layer approach of analysis, right? We look at like, what's the true file type? If it's an archive, we explore that archive and we analyze all the files in that archive. And that is a huge boost in detection, right? Like if you open the archive, you get like a 30+% extra detection, and you actually look at the archive as it is, right? Integration-wise, any REST client just submits the file to Defender. You get back the data ID. Based on that, you can do pooling to get the analysis report and see when the analysis is finished, or you can have like a callback if you offer a webhook where we can call you back with the analysis report. And to retrieve the sanitized file, you just make a request to get the sanitized file. So in theory, everything can happen in like an hour or less of integration to the API. That's the beauty of it. All the configuration, everything you have on the back end, on the Defender side. So we keep the APIs as clean as possible for you to have like a straightforward and direct integration.
So George,
yes,
we have a few questions up here, and it kind of fits in with where we're at. The first one is from Malini. How is OPSWAT better than vulnerability scanners and EDR?
Sure. So when it comes to vulnerability scanners, let's say, I think you're referring to web application vulnerability scanners. That's static analysis, let's say, done like black box texting for the web application itself, right? So that one's going to go and check. It's going to crawl all your pages and try to see if there's any known vulnerability that they can exploit, right? And that's something that is done in a static matter. You can automate it and so on, but that's not going to do anything for the file upload functionality, right? Because that's not necessarily, let's say, if you have like a WordPress with version 1.2.3, where you have the ability to pretty much exploit the vulnerability in the file upload functionality and to upload your own file, that's something the vulnerability scanner is going to be able to detect. But that's it. Only if it's a known vulnerability and so on, right? What we're talking here is more about providing a tool for you to make sure that nothing else happens after that file is being uploaded. Not necessarily the web application itself is being malicious, but the fact that what happens after the file itself is going to be malicious, right? As for EDR, that's pretty much an endpoint product where it's going to monitor the behavior of the file on the time of the execution, right? This is a static analysis. So think about this more like a gateway product. Whatever you put your web application firewall in front of your web servers, you have Defender there as well. So the entry point, we're able to identify if there's anything malicious, and we're able actually to sanitize that content. So whenever it reaches your infrastructure, the content is already safe to consume. On the EDR side, it might already be too late, right? On the EDR, it's going to be like, you just open a document that got access to PowerShell and is trying to, escalate privileges and run something as an admin, right? And maybe the EDR solution is going to be able to contain it or not. But that's already kind of like late in the game, right? We're saying do it right at the gateway, do it right at the beginning. Don't wait for that one to be stored in your infrastructure, share with multiple users and so on, right?
Let's get back. Let's get back
Yes.
to Malini's other 4 questions in a few minutes when we enter the Q&A, so you'll have time to finish. Sorry for the delay, Malini.
Okay, sure. Sorry, and I love to talk a lot, as you guys guessed by now. But I'll explain one thing, because I see one of Malini's questions also like if the solution is on-prem or SaaS. And that was actually a point I wanted to make in this slide anyway. So this solution, it's available both as a SaaS product. We have Defender Cloud, where you have the option for commercial API and free API for like some limited usage. And it's available on-premise. On-premise meaning you're going to deploy it on a VM. If that VM is going to be in your environment, let's say in your data center, or it's going to be in your AWS account, for us, it's still the same Defender core on-premise, right? We offer a bring your own license Defender AMI on AWS Marketplace, if you want to play with that one as well. But as an options, like I said, you have those 4 options: Defender Cloud with 2 flavors, with commercial API and free API, and Defender Core and Defender AMI for the AWS Marketplace. So if you want to, let's say you have privacy concerns, you have like regulations that don't allow you to like share these files, like upload it to a third-party solution for analysis, you can deploy Defender in your environment. If you want to, if you're allowed to reach out to a cloud solution, then you don't have to maintain servers, you don't have to deploy our solution anymore. Therefore, you can go with Defender Cloud. I can explain a couple more things when it comes to detection. We have like multiple flavors. You can deploy it on Linux or Windows for Defender Core. On Linux, we have up to like 15 engines, AV engines for the multi-scanning, and on Windows, we have like 35. Another quick thing I want to mention is the CDR details. The moment you are looking at the sanitization process, that's something we are able to expose. What are the objects that we sanitize in a document? So you have like a clear audit on like what are the objects that we sanitize or remove. And also if they're embedded scripts like macros, JavaScript in PDFs and so on, we're listing also the content of that script as well. So if you want to do like further analysis, if you want to have like a better report, let's say one of your users says, I really need the original file for compliance reasons, something like that, you're gonna be able to know what was actually in that file. And one of the additional options, this kind of like the fifth option, let's say on Defender side, is the ICAP server integration. So a lot of web application firewalls, load balancers, and so on support ICAP protocol. This is a standard which not everybody implements it. That's why it's standard, so nobody will properly use it. But we have a great partnership actually with F5 on this one, right? And we have quite a few more integrations with other vendors as well. But when it comes to web application firewalls and load balancers, F5 is doing a great job there. Pretty much the logic is simple. You integrate on the ICAP, on the F5 side, you just specify the ICAP server IP and the port, and F5 is going to offload all that traffic to ICAP server, which is going to push it to Defender Core for analysis. So again, at the gateway level, right? Right before touch anything in your infrastructure, right? The entry point, you're going to be able to not just scan, but also sanitize that content. And that's very important, right? Because you don't need to actually allow anything extra in your organization and go through multiple hoops to further analysis. You can do it directly at the entry point. Another option would be if you store the files in a NAS product. If you have like a network attached storage, this is something Microsoft actually promotes us heavily on to their customers. You're able to integrate the Defender ICAP with that network attached storage, and if you want to add Windows Defender as part of the analysis process. So you can look into both. We have great partnership with both Microsoft and F5 on these two use cases. That's something, it's easy and fast to deploy. So from my perspective, API integration is the matter. It's an easy way to deploy, and you're gonna have a lot more flexibility on like what are the kind of data and information you want to consume. On ICAP side, it's a pretty much plug and play. In 5 minutes, you can go, I don't know, POC, it's like 5 minutes, and you can go production in 5 minutes. Just specify the IP and the port, and you're kind of like done. When it comes to configuration and so on, everything that we're gonna bring to Defender Core as like additional analysis components, you're gonna have them available to the ICAP server. If you integrate via the API, if we bring new functionality in, you're gonna have to go back to your integration, API integration, and consume the new data. The REST API is pretty straightforward. Again, you have a JSON response, but the more data we add to JSON response, you're gonna have to go and parse it and do additional logic if you want based on that response. On the ICAP server, everything is gonna be grandfathered in. When it comes to like how you can use the solution in other places, I think one of the key factors, and maybe we should have mentioned this one at the beginning, like this technology is heavily being used in cross-domain environments. And when I'm talking cross-domain, think about like anything in critical infrastructures, like from low to high or from unsecured to secure networks. We're heavily deployed in government, in energy, especially like nuclear industry and so on. That's how they're using our solution. And we brought pretty much that entire stack of analysis and sanitization, and we're making it available for file upload, right? And that's the part that you have to understand. Like the solution itself for like file analysis is very flexible. It can fit in multiple use cases. And we've seen a huge growth for us in file upload security. We're heavily used, especially like in finance industry here in US for file upload. just because we have that functionality that's super flexible and they can use it in multiple use cases. So what we've seen in quite a few banks in US is the fact that they're taking our API and expose that API to pretty much multiple departments and organizations or even applications within that bank. And they offer it as like a content inspection service for the entire bank. And then they're just growing the deployment size while everyone else is consuming the service. The same logic applies for malanalysis. You can have all these details as part of the analysis process in your environment. Sanitization is a huge thing for email security as well. So think about whenever you receive like some fake invoices by email and so on, we're able to sanitize that content. So again, regardless how much you're going to train your users not to click a link or open a document, they will eventually do it. This is where sanitization process comes into play. We remove that risk. We remove that embedded object that might drive the malicious behavior and your end users, even though if they're clicking or opening the document, they're going to be secure. And we have a huge deployment when it comes to like secure device access and now with network access control as well, where we can able to provide not just like a compliance check, but also enforcement not to access cloud applications or on-premise applications if they're not, if your device is not secure and you're not properly authenticated. To learn more, we try to expose our philosophy through the OPSWAT Academy. You can actually go and get certified. You can learn not just about our solution. I think the most important part is here that you can learn actually about what we do and what's the best practice that we recommend for different use cases. And based on that, how we apply that philosophy in our products. This is actually a topic that Randy was mentioning in the About section, where we have over 2,000 certified professionals. We released this program early Q4, and in less than 6 months, we have like over 2,000 people certified. Again, with that in mind, the fact that we have this entire experience with file upload, the fact that we have so many deployments in file upload security, more and more people are asking us like, how do we close the gap? This is what we do currently. What else we're missing? And this is like a new service that our professional services team put together. It's like a file upload security assessment. Feel free to reach out to us. We can actually look into like what you guys are doing and what we can recommend for you guys to do better. And we're getting close to the finish line. Again, if there are a couple of things I want you to take away, it's again, shared responsibility, right? Make sure you don't rely that someone will do, I don't know, the file analysis solution, that someone will take care, or like a different department is responsible for that one. I don't care. My hands are clean, right? Make sure you are putting this solution in place right at an entry point before this one is actually gonna expose and like either use your services, more of a distribution platform, or it's gonna go after your end users. Don't rely on a single AV. Don't rely that, hey, I deployed Clem AV, I'm compliant, I don't care about anything else, because you are gonna be exposed. You're highly exposed based on that one. File upload is user input. I cannot emphasize on this enough, right? The way you're spending all these efforts to make sure that you're properly sanitizing user input, file upload is exactly the same thing. And this is where sanitization comes into play, right? There were some recommendations even from OWASP, just remove macros and you're safe. That's not true. There are a lot more things that are happening and you need to be aware of that. And this is where, again, look into the sanitization. Protect the infrastructure versus the end users, right? Again, it's a division responsibility. If your responsibility, you're the owner of the service, and the end user are the ones that needs to be scanning and analyzing the files and so on. That's not necessarily the case, right? The more you're relying on these third-party services, you're putting your support portal on Salesforce or Zendesk and so on. Those are the files that are going to be uploaded. They're not going to, or they're not going to offer a service to analyze that files necessarily. If they do, kudos to them, but not all solutions are offering that one. So you need to make sure that end users are secure as well. And again, regardless of the source of the file, regardless of the user, and if the file is being uploaded from your environment and so on, you cannot trust that file. Don't treat them separately because there's an authentication layer in front of your web application, right? You need to make sure that all the files are handled as it's a malicious file. Make sure you're scanning, analyzing it, sanitizing it, and so on before you're releasing it for consumption to your end users. And with that in mind, thank you very much. I said we have quite a few questions, and
Yeah, so now we'll open up to the Q&A. So please enter your questions into the questions tab at the top of your Zoom console. And if we're unable to answer your question during today's webinar, we'll follow up by email. So the first question is, how do you manage encrypted file uploads?
Sure. So depending if that's being, let's say, if it comes through ICAP, that's being unencrypted, let's say, on the website, web browser, and so on, like whether it's the ICAP client. We do have a functionality on the API for you to submit the file with the passphrase. So you have like the password for the encrypted file. You can pass that one. We can open the file, analyze it, sanitize it, and encrypt it back for you.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, how we deal with them is we empower you. You'll know that they're there. You choose how you want to deal with them. And for some, you can actually put in a password if you have it so that you can scan. Okay, I'll let you go on.
So the next question is, for web application file upload, if we implement F5 ICAP with MetaDefender as an ICAP server, can we notify the users if the file is infected and how the flow would be?
Right. So ICAP is a protocol. The way it works is pretty much, it allows you to offer something like a file is allowed, file is blocked, and like the modified content, right? At the end of the day, we can actually reject that request, and F5 will pretty much reject the request from their side, or we can provide something like an, I don't know, tombstone if you want, that, hey, this file was blocked, and we kind of like a replace page or something like that, and the reason why it was blocked. So we can like relay that one back to F5, and that they were gonna push the request further.
Got it. Next question is, does CDR work with sanitizing the documents such as PDF or Excel files with multiple language packs?
Right. Yes, that works. We have support for I don't know, most languages. We have like deployments worldwide, so we haven't had concerns. Anything that was like, I don't know, Asia Pac, Middle East, Europe, US, we have deployments all over the world for CDR. So I think there was at some point I saw something with like a additional Unicode on Chinese, but we fixed that one. So from that perspective, there's no concerns on like multi-language support.
Got it. Does this work on AWS, and do you scan the S3 buckets?
Yes, actually, that's a very good question. Like, yes, you can deploy MetaDefender Core in AWS. As I mentioned before, we have that AMI for bring your own license, which requires for you to reach out to us for a license key. So you can deploy it. You can actually deploy it in auto-scaling groups and create your own environment. It's like highly available in fault-tolerant. When it comes to S3 buckets, you can either integrate, it's like, I don't know, 2 Lambda scripts, let's say, to upload the files then being uploaded to S3. But we're also going to bring to market very soon, like in less than a month, we're going to bring to market a new product that actually offers out-of-the-box integration with S3, Dropbox, and so on, and can provide you like that orchestration layer if you want to submit the files to MetaDefender for analysis. And you will be able to define your own rules there, like how the file should be analyzed, like upload time, or like once a week to go to the entire repository and so on. But right now, we have quite a few of our customers, they're deploying MetaDefender in AWS, and they have their own scripts on like how they're going to consume that API as part of the S3 integration.
Great. Is this just VMs, or are containers such as Docker supported?
We don't have Docker support for now. We're looking actually to add support for Docker starting with next quarter. For instance, like the product I previously mentioned, the one that's going to have that native integration with S3 and so on, that's Docker based, and it includes MetaDefender Core in a Docker container as well. So that's why I'm saying, like, once we release that one, we'll start adding official support for Docker as well.
Great. How does this scale horizontally and vertically, and how do I scope my needs?
Ooh, that's a long discussion. So in theory, everything, so let's say, depending on the number of engines and like technologies and the way you define your workflows, right, you'll need to have certain, let's say, performance or requirements, and also like system requirements, right? If you're gonna go and define something, I need an SLA to have my file sanitized and everything within a second, that's feasible. Depends on like what exactly is your file. If you're gonna have like an archive with 500,000 files in it, that's not gonna happen within a second, right? Also, think about this way. Yes, we can scale vertically. You add more engines, let's say AV engines, that will require more CPU powers because it's CPU intensive as well. But there's also like IO, a lot of IO involved as well. So regardless how much you're gonna scale vertically, it's gonna hit a certain threshold where it's gonna flatten out. So it's better, and this is kind of like an AWS best practice recommendation as well, right? When they're talking about their framework, always try to scale out. So you're gonna reduce dependency, you're gonna remove any single point of failures, right? And you're gonna be able to have a distributed load instead of like focusing on one big box that can either choke, let's say, if you throw too many files at it, or again, it's gonna flatten out, so you're not gonna have the expected throughput that you would require.
Okay, next question is, what happens with the files with the on-prem version versus the cloud version? And are you storing or sharing the files?
So on-premise, everything is in your environment. You can use this one, and we have a big chunk of our customers, again, back to energy and government, that are actually using us in offline environments as well. And that means that we have a mechanism to bring in updates in that environment for sure, but that means that nothing leaves that environment. So even if you deploy it in an online environment, the only information that OPSWAT might collect is if you have any engine crashes or engine issues, and we just report the count of the issues, not actually the issues. So there's no information sent back to OPSWAT from that perspective. We don't store the files, we don't share the files with our vendors from the on-premise solution, right? So most of our customers, and again, this is like a huge privacy concern. Most of our customers have that privacy concern. That's why we have this very niche market, let's say. And this is like one of the best selling tools for us. We don't report, we don't store, we don't even the hash of the file, we don't report that one back to us. So I have no idea what are the files you're scanning, file types, and so on. And that's not necessarily our focus, right? We want to make sure that you're feeling secure, you have the best technology in place, and nothing is reported back to us that might, have privacy concerns. On the cloud side, this is the reason that I mentioned that two different APIs, the free API and commercial API. For the free API, that limited usage, it's not about like that daily limited usage, but also the fact you're relying on free API. That means we're allowed to store the files and even share it with our vendor partners. We have a malware sharing program in place. Like I mentioned, we have over 35 anti-malware vendors as part of our multi-scanner on Windows, but as part of our secure access program, we have over 100 anti-malware vendors that are part of our solution. So that's the huge vendor base or like partnership base that we have, and we have that malware sharing program in place with them, and that's being uploaded to the free API. If there's anything malicious or like even like false positives and so on, we're trying to report to our vendor partners for them to improve their process as soon as possible, for them to be able to serve better our joint customers, right? When it comes to commercial API on the cloud, you have the option to opt in for private scanning, which means that we're not going to store the files. We just analyze the file and then immediately delete it. We're not going to store it in our S3 buckets. We're not going to share it with anyone else and so on.
Great. Do you have partnerships with other load balancer vendors?
Yes, we do. This is something that we try to enhance heavily right now. There's something that we already built some partnership. Let's say we have on the ICAP side, we have integrations right now with F5, A10 networks, Citrix NetScaler. We don't have an official partnership, let's say with X-Ray, but we have a couple of joint deployments on that one. We're trying to build a new partnership with a couple more companies right now. I prefer to announce them once they're available, but yes, that's something we enhance quite heavily. As I mentioned, file upload is growing heavily for us. Therefore, we're trying to bring all the tools or like all the solutions that are being used in your environment to be able to serve you better and faster, right? So please, if you have any solutions that supports ICAP in your environment you think might be relevant for you and you want to consume that through the ICAP, just reach out to us. We can look into it. From our perspective, if they implemented properly ICAP on the ICAP client side, it's like a 5 minutes or like integration and maybe like 15 minutes to document the integration, and that's it.
Great. So we have time for one last question. What is the average processing time to deconstruct and reconstruct a file from the CDR module?
That depends on the complexity of the file, right? So 99 percentile, it's going to be, let's say, within a second up to like 2 seconds tops, right? But we might have cases where it's going to take even like 5 seconds or even 10 seconds. If you give me a PowerPoint with like, let's say this one has like 30 slides and I have like a lot of images and so on, it's not just one file, right? It's like 30 slides, each of them with one image. So we're talking like I don't know, maybe like 40 to 50 different objects that needs to be sanitized. We're handling each of those ones like separate ones, and they needs to be analyzed and sanitized, right? So that's something that's going to add to delay. So think about all the complex files as more like archives that contain multiple other objects that are also files. So 99 percentile, I would still say roughly like a second, but it might actually be some outliers here and there depending on the complexity of the file.
Great. So we're at the top of the hour. That concludes this webinar. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And if we were unable to get your questions, we'll reply by email. Point out there's some available resources in this PowerPoint slide that will be sent to all the registrants. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Great. That concludes today's webinar.